Greetings everyone. Welcome to Top Tier Tips, your prime spot for tips and tricks to help you out in Dead or Alive 5. Alright, last week we went over, well, for the last couple of weeks we went over just applications of frame data and frame advantages, with last week in particular pertaining to the dealing with negative frames, whether you're at negative frames or how to take advantage of an opponent being left at negative frames. Alright, for this week we're going to be applying frame data a little more, but this time in the case of pressure. So I'm guessing that once you get the hang of applying movement to engage your opponent and have successfully navigated the neutral game to get your offense started on your opponent, so you're probably thinking, what's next? Well, you pressure them, of course. If you want to win matches consistently in DOA5, you need to be able to pressure your opponents. I mean, what this means is forcing your opponents to take action to either escape your offense or forcing your opponents to take some sort of action, period, in order to be able to, well, in order to just win the match at all. What pressure is telling your opponent that you're the one in charge, you're the top dog, and that they're going to have to pick their spots very carefully if they want to escape their most uncomfortable predicament. Alright, so let's look at the most common type of pressure, offensive pressure. This form of pressure is based around forcing your opponent to remain on the defensive for as long as possible without many opportunities to reverse. Along with the guard break pressure, I did refer to that on previous sections. Mainly, offensive pressure revolves around utilizing moves that are plus on block, neutral, or slight negative, like no more than about -3. And of course, offensive pressure also involves using guard breaks which are positive on block, because yes, there are some guard breaks in DOA5 and last round that are actually negative on block. A lot of the more grappler based characters like Bass or Tina also tend to have negative guard breaks on top of positive guard breaks. And also, I mean, going along with offensive pressure, along with the aforementioned points just mentioned now, offensive pressure can also involve utilizing string delays and free cancels, along with implementing throws that like reset your opponent. An example would be like something like Hitomi's 6T. This throw right here. This throw right here grants her +10 on every time it connects, on top of dealing on 32 damage if connecting on normal hit. So that right there is like an example of a common reset throw. Other characters that have these kind of reset throws would include like Genfu's 214T, or also known as a quarter circle back T, Elliot's 214T, Kasumi's 46T, or Christie's 4T, for example, are all really good reset throws. Actually, just continuing on with reset throws, I mean, these kind of throws, like stuff like this, are really great for pressuring opponents in close range, thanks to the consistent frame advantage they provide, coupled with the damage inflicted. Yeah, like mentioned earlier, 6T with Hitomi always 6T always does is +10 and 32 damage. No matter how many times you use it, even if you end up using it consecutively, it's always going to give you +10. Alright, so like just to continue on, opponents caught in a reset throw vortex are going to be being pressured heavily to try and escape this kind of a throw vortex situation. Alright, though, I mean, I'm mostly gonna use the reset throw and pressure example. You're gonna base it around like Hitomi's 6D, because a large part of Hitomi's game plan is to hit that throw. Alright, so with Hitomi 60, alright, she's got plus 10 to work with. Alright, unfortunately with how Dead or Alive 5's frame system works, on paper with plus 10 you should be able to connect a 10 frame jab, but how the frame data works is that to be able to take it, make use of your advantage, like your plus frames or whatever frames you're at, you have to add an extra 2 frames onto that. So in order for a 10 frame jab to be guaranteed, what that means is that you have to have you need at least plus 12. So in order to, for instance, in order to be able to punish something that's like negative on block or something, you would need a 10 frame jab. The same applies for if you make use of attacks to give you a guaranteed frame advantage. So with plus 10, Hitomi technically can't get anything guaranteed because you would need an 8 frame attack to be able to do that. But plus 10 for her is still really, really good. Alright, so let's say, so with this plus 10, pretty much Hitomi can follow up with any attack up to about around I-19, I-20 without any fear of retaliation basically beyond some sort of a hard read. So, and an example of like a hard read can be like a correct defensive hold, a high crush, a sidestep, like stuff like that. I mean, just to define what a hard read is a hard read is essentially any action taken on a read that is a result of catching on to an opponent's tendencies. I mean, so this is basically means though is that basically when you end up throwing something out, or if you end up making use of a move that could generally be considered risky, but if you know an opponent's going to take a certain action in response to you, you can make use of a hard read to counter that or to just turn things around. Like basically, I mean, like I kind of mentioned, on their own, hard reads are generally riskier options that are only beneficial when the read is correct, as opposed to taking like a safer action, like for instance, after being hit with Hitomi 60, you could just simply block after it. Because yeah, I mean, under most situations, after a Hitomi player does 60, they're going to end up doing some sort of attack after. Usually, well, they can mix it up, but generally, in order for it to be a mix-up, they're going to be doing a mid after. So obviously, if they end up like doing it, let's say like repeatedly, that means you can avoid like a low option or something like that simply by ducking. But now just continuing on with what the person on the attack, basically Hitomi here would be, what Hitomi would be doing here would be basically there's a lot of different mix-up options that you can do, but I'll just continue to explain hard reads just a little more. Like generally speaking, safe actions relatively safer actions if you're on the defensive. The number one safe action you could do when you're on the defensive is to just simply block. But if you do want to try and strike back, the safest options would be either your jab, your P, or your 2P. I mean, after that you could start making use of what's generally called like riskier attacking from disadvantage or Abari options like crush moves. Although most characters 1P is generally a good and relatively safe high crush, but of course relatively riskier crushes can be usually, a lot of characters have like a crush launcher, for instance. But yeah, I mean, but of course hard reads generally garner greater rewards, of course, when you're successful with them, especially when you take the triangle system into play. For instance, if Hitomi was to go for 60 and do it again, and if you read that she's gonna do it and you end up doing a launcher, you would end up getting high counter damage for doing that. Alright, and just to give you like a little recap for your benefit, high counter damage is 150%, so when you end up doing a juggle after that, I mean, you can get a lot of damage off of that due to the higher launch, plus the, on top of that, you get the increased damage. So, I mean, launching a throw attempt could be, launching a throw attempt obviously is extremely rewarding when you connect it. Alright, but now I'm going to now just start to focus a bit more now on like what Hitomi would end up doing after 6T. Alright, so as you could probably already guess, pretty much with plus 10, Hitomi's essentially completely in control after hitting this throw. With plus 10, she can toss out a variety of high, mid, and low strikes. Like mentioned earlier, anything up to about like 19 frames, or anything up to about 19 or 20, around like 20 frames is usually the opponent won't be able to interrupt it with conventional interrupts, because unless they yeah, pretty much. I mean, the worst thing you would have to worry about is if they have like a 9-frame jab. But even then, if they have a 9-frame jab, you'd still would get up to about at least about an 18 or 19 frame attack on them. Especially if you take into account things like strikes. Well, in terms of strike priority, for instance, if an attack ends up dealing more damage than the opponent's, then it will win out. An example is jabs generally only do 10 damage. So if you do a move that does more than 10 damage and you connect on the same frame, you'll beat it out. So that's another thing though, is that generally the attacks that Hitomi will do after 6T will generally be stronger than just a simple jab. Unless she's trying to set you up for the throw repeatedly. Alright, so an example of like a high option you can do after that is like, for instance, PP, then you can go for like another 6T. I mean, you can keep doing that and get the vortex going. A mid option could be like a 6PK or 6KK free cancels. You can use 6H+K if you think 6H+K if you think the opponents may start to try and sidestep. This one is actually a really good poke. An interesting aspect also about it is that it's actually really light negative on block. Yeah, it's -2 plus pushback, so technically costing for this for a tracking move. And it even has follow-up attacks too, which, hell, even the high option is safe after it. Just the low option is unsafe. So yeah, so for your primary mid options will generally be one that being like a 6PK or 6KK. You can also do stuff like 1P+K. You kind of get the idea. And if the opponent does end up like disrespecting your frame advantage, then you can end up like doing a bigger move if you think they're going to disrespect you, like a 6KKP. So I mean, lots of different things you can do, but a general favorite I like to do if the opponent is locked down is to just maintain. You can maintain frame advantage with 2H+K. I mean, but yeah, if you keep doing it, they're eventually going to duck it, but then that can leave them open to get hit by 6K, which gives you it's plus 14 on it's plus 14 on normal hit, but on counter hit there you get plus 23. I mean, if the opponent crouches, also you'll get counter hit status. Alright, but as you can see there, I mean, Hitomi can do like a lot of stuff off of just like one reset throw. So I mean, you could check out these different kind of things with your chosen character if they do have a throw that gives you frame advantage. I mean, you could just try different things, to see what you can do off it. So, anyway, so now I mean, that's kind of the main kind of gist of offensive pressure. Well, I mean, another thing also like to take in count is what moves are like advantage on block. So obviously, if you're advantage on block, you can usually just as long as it's at least like is like +2 or +3, you can usually probably throw out anything. With +1, I mean, the mind game can kind of go a bit back and forth. Like in my last session, I kind of like went over to kind of a meta game pertaining to being at from 0 to +3. That it's a bit of a mind game on both, but when you get something like +5 or higher, or like +8, then yeah, the opponent pretty much can't really do that much to you besides take some sort of defensive action. So basically, in order to escape the situation, you're probably gonna have to make a correct read, or if you make a mistake. Anyways, I'm gonna go on to the other type of pressure now. Alright, we went over offensive pressure, so the next type of pressure to take note of is called zone-in pressure, also referred to as defensive pressure. What this is pressuring your opponent to take action through the use of effective spacing and defense. Alright, so for any Hitomi enthusiasts out there, Hitomi not only is good at offensive pressure, he's also good at defensive pressure. So basically, defensive pressure is focusing around kind of keeping your opponent out. The kind of gist of pressuring them is that in order for them to be able to win the round, they have to be able to hurt you. They have to be able to do damage. If they can't get in on you and can't do damage, then then basically it's your match. So the main kind of basis for defensive pressure is just making it hard for the opponent to get on you. Alright, so example of characters with strong keep out can include Momiji, who also happens to have a really awesome neutral game, Ayane, Ain, Hitomi, Lisa, or Janli, for instance, can very effectively work zone-in pressure strategy into their game plan. Alright, so the main kind of large aspect of zone-in pressure is that it's based around trying to keep your opponent from trying to get their offense started. And basically, if an opponent kind of has trouble getting their offense started, they might start to get a little antsy, a little frustrated, a little impatient, and that's how you can really start to capitalize on them. Is that once they start making mistakes because from frustration of the inability to be able to get their own game plan started. So of course, as I've been kind of showing here, and also been kind of making mention of in other sessions, is that one of the kind of basic forms of keep out with Hitomi or Ain is making use of their 236P. What this is just as a bit of a recap, is it's a 15 frame kind of like called Death Fist move that knocks the opponent back, and well, due to its speed and its effective range, like it reaches here over 2.3 meters. So with this move, you can interrupt and whiff punish a lot of opponent's moves. So if you couple that with like a good movement ability, then basically you can actually end up learning how to like space this and make it difficult for the opponent to try and like get in on you. And then you just every time they either whiff or get close, you can use this to blast them back, or to mix things up, you even have a high option, 4-6 I mean, this is now a 12 frame high punch that reaches almost as far, like just a little shorter of that distance if I remember correctly. Alright, so basically if you hit the opponent with a death fist like enough times, I mean it'll start to annoy the fuck out of them, and then they will, well, like I kind of mentioned earlier, they'll make more mistakes as they kind of struggle to try and get in on you, because they'll just become kind of antsy and sloppy. So it's like basically the more you, it's also another way to try and get into like your opponent's head. The more you get into your opponent's head, the less effectively they fight. Like as you could probably figure out, running a zone and pressure game when you have a life lead is a very good idea. I mean, this is made even stronger if your character has really good keep out tools, like keep out for dummies, death fists. You know. And another thing, and the main reason why having running a keep out game when you have a life lead, also known as simply just having more health than your opponent, the reason why it's good is because as you can see at the top, the constantly clicking down clock all of a sudden becomes your friend. Like when you have the life lead, you don't have to approach your opponent, and instead you need to make approach, since they're the ones who have to damage you, have to hurt you, or they risk getting counted up by the timer. I'll repeat that part because I need to put a little emphasis in that. If you have the life lead, you don't have to approach your opponent. You have no obligation to. So what you can do what's called laming it out, or playing lame, and that's turtling your opponent. You might annoy the shit out of some people online with legitimate strategy to lame it out and turtle. I mean, yeah, obviously to be able to run a good keep out or zoning pressure game, you need a good what's called a turtle foundation, which I will refer to in a later section. I can just give you like a rundown pretty simply. Turtling is simply focusing entirely on defense, as opposed. So what you're doing is you're not doing anything where you're kind of overextending yourself and leaving yourself at the risk of being punished or whiff punished or counterattacked in some way. So obviously turtling is very heavily based around having your opponent try and come to you. Then you take advantage of that. So if your character is good at turtling, then working on zone and pressure game could be very beneficial. Alright, I mean the simple way of really just referring to it is, turtling is just simply called overwhelming your opponent with defense. So basically, it could also be considered letting your opponent hang themselves to death by them making mistakes and you capitalizing it and giving it a good death fist to just give it a good death fist to punish it. So when you end up running through matches in Dead or Alive 5 or Last Round or anything like that, what you usually want to do to keep in mind is whether it's best to run either an offensive or a defensive pressure game. When you're in close, I mean, once you've kind of gone past the neutral game, then what you're doing is trying to find ways to maintain offense or control over your opponent. Alright, I mean, especially with the kind of the order that my sessions have going, the first thing to keep in mind, of course, is movement. Then once you're okay with movement, the next thing is to focus on is a neutral game. Then after a neutral game, then this is when you're going to be, once you've quote-unquote won the neutral game, that means you've gained advantage over your opponent, then that's when you want to start trying to apply offensive pressure. If you either have a life lead or if you're kind of unsure how to go about your opponent, then you could try and run a zoning pressure game or a defensive pressure game. What this means is instead of advancing at your opponent, what you do is you try and bait them to come at you. It's like obviously, if I said before, if you have the life lead, zoning pressure can work really well. Even if your health is pretty close, it's fine too. Like the only time you really have to approach your opponent is if they have a life lead over you. Or if I know that the opponent has shitty defense, then you can just kind of walk all over them. Then maybe I might like come at them. Like I can usually tell if an opponent might fall to I can usually tell if an opponent might fall to like any kind of generic offensive pressure, anything like that. Like mixing up pre-cancels and strikes is a form of offensive pressure, because if the opponent doesn't know when their turn is, they can't really like pressure back. So I mean, anything that like keeps them on the defensive could be considered offensive pressure. I'll give you some examples of some characters that you can use for offensive pressure. Some good ones would be like, well, Hitomi's one of them. Another one you can use is Rig, Zack, Christy, Helena, Kasumi. You could even try and pressure with characters like Jan Lee. I'm pretty sure there's some that there's probably some that I'm missing. Like I'm just saying this off like the top of my head, but oh, you can even also pressure with characters like Elliot. But it's just simply a case of what you do is go into the lab and check out your character's tools, see how well they can take advantage of free cancels and frame advantage. As for like good turtlers, I like mentioned some before. I mean, I always advocate Hitomi and Ein for turtling, and then well, Janley is also a good turtler, or like Lisa. You could Hitomi. Well, no, I already said that. I mean, Momoji. I think I might have said Ayane, but yeah, there's a bunch of characters that have a good turtling capability. But anyways, that's it for now. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and don't forget to rate, subscribe, and they leave any sort of feedback, any sort of comments or anything. Feel free to do that. Like if you have any questions about anything, feel free to contact me too, and I'll do my best to help you out. So that's it for this week, and thank you for tuning in to Top Tier Tips, and I'll see you next time.